Hello, and thank you for having me here today. These are the contents that we are going to cover in today's presentation, and I would like to start by describing the context that language teachers in UK universities work in. There are many accounts in the literature about the low professional and academic status of teaching in general in UK higher education. So teaching is disregarded in favor of research. It has very little value in promotion and progression processes, and it's also set aside or increasingly separated from the research of academics, from the pure research of academics. So in this context, it will be relatively easy to find groups of staff on heavy teaching loads and non-research related jobs who may end up feeling like second-class citizens. This is also the case in the case of modern foreign language teachers, who are often perceived as just simple service providers, and all the more real in the case of language centers, where, as we will see later, very little or no research is carried out, and that's why they are often perceived as being marginal to the core of academic life. And I like to use a term that was coined by Shelley M. Park in an essay that she published in 1996 to talk about these groups of staff on low status positions, low prestige positions, less secure positions, more precarious contracts, and mostly related to teaching. And she described them as the intellectual proletariat. And I think this term is very fitting for the current position, the current situation of language center teaching staff in UK higher education. But we are talking about language teachers, and I wanted to dedicate a couple of minutes to the concept of language teachers. So what makes a language teacher? How does one become a language teacher? If we look at the accounts of the professional life of individuals who ended up teaching languages, something that comes up frequently, that's very, very common, it's the acknowledgement that those individuals became language teachers by accident, as a byproduct of other life events. But in these accounts, there's no acknowledgement of, there's no consideration of the type of training required to become a language teacher, a professional language teacher, or any kind of professional accreditation that could be required to teach languages in higher education, as it would be the case for any other profession. And this has a possibly dangerous consequence of disseminating the notion that anyone who can speak a language proficiently enough can teach it, as long as they can express themselves in that language. However, teaching is much more than classroom performance, as Knight and Troller say in this quote, which I love, by the way, because it uses the word performance, which I think it's very relevant for language teaching in particular. So there's a full range of activities of higher intellectual work that's associated to teaching, and that goes well beyond just the pure fact of standing in front of a group of people and entertaining them for a couple of hours just by speaking the target language, the language that you're teaching. So teaching a language is much more than that. This question of who can teach a language is closely connected to the concept of native language competence. I'm not going to this, I don't have the time to discuss the notion of native speaker, because as you know, it's a very complex notion and it's not as straightforward as it may seem at first sight. But it's been widely acknowledged that it's frequent practice at least in UK universities, to hire individuals to work as language teachers, not because of their academic credentials, but because they are perceived to be native speakers of the language. So as they can teach the language because they speak it. This implies the devaluation of other qualities or other teacher attributes, other skills that teachers would need to have, like pedagogical skills or the specific knowledge of the discipline. However, very recent accounts of individuals who have started to teach in languages in higher education still insist on this legitimacy of native speakers, whatever it is, whatever the concept means, of native speakers as the best individuals to teach the language. And this is a quote from a very recent essay published by Donata Puntil only last year, 2019. By the way, I think Donata is presenting later today in this conference, so I'm really looking forward to her contribution. But Donata interviewed a number of individuals who worked as language teachers in UK universities. And one of the participants said in one of the interviews, said these words. She said, "I think it really makes a difference when you teach your own language. Definitely, yes, you are the real thing." So therefore implying that you are the real thing because you are a native speaker. But there's no consideration and there's no awareness of the fact that maybe someone who spent years of their life, who has invested years of their life training as a linguist or training as a language teacher may actually be the real thing because they've been prepared for the job. However, this is a concept that this is the situation that we find ourselves in, and these are the concepts that still prevail. Let's talk about qualifications of modern foreign language teachers. Something that is striking when we start looking at qualifications to become language teachers in UK universities is the lack of a formal path, of a formal route to become accredited professionally for universities, to teach at university, to teach language at university. So there's no official qualification for that particular job. There is a variety of accepted training programs. Some of these programs are as short as 4 weeks in duration. One predominant, as we will see later, a predominant qualification that teachers hold, language teachers hold in the UK is the PGCE, the Postgraduate Certificate in Education. This is a certificate that qualifies individuals to work as teachers, in the case of languages, as language teachers, in schools, in secondary schools, in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And it only takes 9 months to complete. So it's 9 months of study to complete, to achieve this qualification. And this qualification, which is valid to teach in secondary schools, is widely accepted in UK universities for language to teach languages as well. So we find ourselves in a situation where a graduate in any discipline who spends between 4 weeks and 9 months of their lives training to achieve this postgraduate qualification can teach a language indistinctively in a secondary school or in a university in the UK. Let's bear this in mind when we discuss the next section, which is the research engagements of modern foreign language teachers in UK universities. So as you know, research is an integral part of academic life, but the intellectual pursuits of language teachers beyond the mere teaching in the classroom is perceived as doesn't have a high consideration in UK universities. So it's not considered as worthy of attention as research from the academics who may be teaching cultural modules. So because of this reluctance to accept as valid the research of language teachers, in UK universities there is this term, that's widely used to define the intellectual activity of language teachers, which is the term scholarship, which in practice is basically the same as second-rate research, just to express the difference between pure research and teachers' research. However, in theory, the scholarship of teaching, the work that scholarship of teaching involves is not second-rate at all, as we can see in this quote that we have on screen. So as the benefits of research are very unclear and limited for teachers, in the case of language teachers in particular, it's maybe unsurprising that the research engagement of language teachers in UK universities is very low. And Simon Borg has been looking at the low research engagement of language teachers. I need to say that his study is about English language teachers, or teachers of English as a foreign language in language schools in the UK. But because it was based in language schools, I thought his findings could be relevant for our project, for our context, language centers. So he's been looking at the possible reasons why language teachers don't engage so much in research, and he found two possible reasons. One was that there is confusion among language teachers as to what is research, what constitutes research. So for example, he found out that many language teachers thought that research was maybe attending conferences, not presenting at conferences, just attending, reviewing textbooks, or looking at practical journals about teaching, or just doing class observation and discussing the class afterwards with colleagues. And the second reason, a second possible reason that he identified was that many language teachers had a negative attitude towards published research on pedagogy, on the pedagogy of languages, language teaching, because they perceived that these accounts, these research accounts, have nothing to do with the real day-to-day work in the classroom. So it was for them, it was disconnected from reality. That's why they refused to engage with this type of research. In any case, we find ourselves in a situation, if we take into account what we discussed earlier regarding qualifications, the landscape of language teaching in UK universities is one where we can find maybe graduates in any discipline, in philosophy or biology or business, who maybe has spent between 4 weeks and 9 months training as a language teacher, and they end up teaching a language in a university in the UK, and then they are expected to do research in language teaching. But this is simply not going to happen, because it's unrealistic to expect that these professionals from different fields, from different backgrounds, are going to have the initiative to start a project in research in language teaching when they don't have the background or they don't have the skills to carry out research. So it's unfair to place these expectations on staff who simply are not prepared to fulfill them. Let's look at the numbers and statistics now. I've been looking mainly at data that was available in the public domain. So I've been looking at staff profiles on universities' websites, at language teachers' profiles on universities' websites, because this wasn't my original plan. Initially, what I had planned was to spend the summer collecting data with questionnaires and interviews. But of course, it was all before COVID-19 struck. So in view of the additional workload that all language teachers in the UK have had to face just to prepare for online teaching in the next academic year, I realized that I wouldn't be able to collect data, because colleagues wouldn't have the time to engage in a project that had nothing to do with the emergency situation that we find ourselves in. So I've decided to leave proper data collection for later on, when everything has settled down a bit. And I've just collected this data from universities' websites. And I have selected the universities from the Russell Group. It's 24 universities. I had to limit the scope of the project in some way, so I have selected the Russell Group, which is a group of self-selected universities who do the most research in the UK and who are the most demanding as well in terms of the qualifications they require from students to join them. So they are perceived as being the top universities. In total, I've been looking at 742 staff profiles in both language centers and modern foreign languages departments. I couldn't split both categories cleanly because in many cases it was the same people, it was the same staff who worked in language centers and in modern foreign languages departments. So I couldn't distinguish clearly in all cases. But nevertheless, there were 479 members of staff who definitely worked in language centers. Of course, this way of collecting data has its limitations, but as I said, it's a provisional measure thing until things go back to normal, if they ever do. I've been collecting data on different aspects, and for this presentation, I want to focus on the qualifications. So if we look at the undergraduate qualifications of modern foreign language teachers, something that catches our attention very immediately, if we look at the graphs, is the prominence of the proportion of teachers who have a degree in a language different from the target language. Of course, we don't have the data, we don't have the accounts of the individual teachers to explain why this might be the case. We can only make assumptions like, for example, individuals who completed a degree in English studies and wanted to live in the UK, and they came to live in the UK and they ended up teaching their own language. But this is just a hypothesis. This is something that we need to set aside for the moment until it's tested, until it's proved. Aside from that, it's striking, in my opinion, how similar the proportions of staff, language teaching staff who completed a degree in a long languages subject, how similar this proportion is to the proportion of staff who has completed a degree in the target language. They are very, very, very close, especially in the case of language centers. So this is something to think about. This is something that we can consider in the light of what we discussed earlier about teaching qualifications and so on. If we look at postgraduate qualifications, we can see that it's very striking the fact that in the case of modern foreign languages departments and language centers in the first graph, doctoral training is the most prominent qualification, but this could be explained by the fact that in some institutions, there is no division between teaching staff, language teaching staff, and the staff who teach cultural modules. So these staff, these teachers, these lecturers are going to be qualified to doctoral level, of course, because it's a requirement for the job. So they will teach the language as well, and they make up for this high percentage of staff qualified at doctoral level. But apart from that, I wanted to highlight the fact that if you look at the bar in green, it's the second most frequent qualification for language teachers in UK universities. And this is this PGCE certificate that I discussed earlier, this 9-month certificate that I mentioned earlier. And it's the second most frequent, as I say. It's even more prominent than the PG CAP. The PG CAP is a name, it has different names in different institutions. It's the blue bar, but it's a postgraduate certificate to teach in higher education, specifically at universities. It's not very popular among language teachers, as we can see. But this percentage, this proportion of teachers who had a PGCE is even superior to the proportion of teachers who had a master's degree in teaching languages. So this is more food for thought. My final thoughts had many questions and not so many answers. So I have selected a couple of questions just to give a hint of how this project might develop in the future. My first question is there anything that language teachers can do to raise their profile in academia? And a possible answer is yes, possibly. They could possibly engage more in research, but as we saw earlier, research of language teachers depends on the right conditions to carry out this research and to receive credit for it. And it depends on the teacher's capability and training and background to be able to carry out this research. Second question is, what can universities do to make sure that the language teachers they recruit are well prepared for full academic work? And my answer is that universities need to review the recruitment processes that they use currently to recruit language teachers, because these processes are not fit to assess the range of skills that language teachers need to apply in higher education. Because the future of modern languages as a discipline, particularly in UK higher education, which is under scrutiny right now because there's a lot of talk and a lot of worry about the future of this discipline in universities, in UK universities. This future depends not only on the research that's being carried out at top universities, but it also depends on languages being taught at an academic level as an academic discipline. And it's going to be a joint effort if we really want to save modern languages as an academic discipline. And it doesn't only depend on one side of the spectrum. It depends on both research and language teaching. So this is my call for universities to take once and for all language teaching seriously in UK, in this higher education environment, and to act in consequence and to raise the profile of language teachers in higher education. Thank you.